know that I have written a book. It also was inspired by this opioid epidemic. It's called Zombie Effects, and it's just dealing with the effects of the heroin and opioids and how they affect the family. And I wrote this book mainly for parents, many times parents of addicts. Sorry if people are offended by that term, addicts, or those that are addicted to substances. Many times the families, the parents, do feel guilty. They may have had a drug addiction problem themselves, or may be struggling with drug addiction and feeling that they pass that on to their children. And so I wrote this book also as a means for them to empower themselves so that they can take back their families. So I just want to go through some of the chapters. It's a short book, it's but it has a lot of good information, in my opinion. So chapter 1 is why kids use drugs, and I talk about the effects of peer pressure, and particularly the adolescent period when kids are trying to become more independent and make an identity for themselves. And this is where the peers become very important in the child's life. Then I talk also about mental health disorders, how kids that are struggling with depression or anxiety also have an increased risk to use drugs, and also children that have been diagnosed with ADHD. In chapter 2, I talk about why I named this Zombie Effects, where it comes from. There was a book about zombies, and they described these zombies as slaves made to do the bidding of an all-powerful taskmaster. And that's how I see those that are addicted to opiates and heroin, that the heroin is a powerful taskmaster that takes over their lives and takes their lives. In chapter 3, I talk about how to know if your kids are using drugs. There was a campaign not too long ago called Hiding in Plain Sight, where there was a mock-up of a child's bedroom, and at first glance you think you're just looking at a bedroom, but then they describe all the tiny clues that give away that there's drug use going on, including these California safes. They just look like bottles of soda or potato chips, Pringles, but they actually have a screw top lid, and then the kids can hide drugs in there, or books. Something can look like a plain old book, and yet inside there's a place to hide drugs. Also, being aware of different items in the child's bedroom that don't belong there. Straws, maybe your spoons are missing. Looking at belts that can be used as tourniquet devices. So all these things that an astute parent may find if they look for them. And also I talk about the physiological changes that you see in somebody that's addicted to opiates. The pupils of the eyes often will be constricted. That can be a sign. Many times I hear from parents that they couldn't tell when their kids were using drugs because when they were on the drugs, they acted normal. And when they were off the drugs is when they acted bizarre. But even if the kids are acting normal, the body changes are still visible. So look for those pupils. Also, they describe nystagmus, when you look to the side, or the eyes bouncing back and forth. All of those are telltale signs. And then the nodding off, or the lack of responsiveness when somebody is being spoken to. In chapter 5, I describe what is drug addiction. I'll just read here. The hallmark of drug addiction is the state of compulsive drug seeking that persists despite negative consequences. So even after someone has gone to jail, or they're stealing from their parents, they're stealing from their families, they don't want to do this, but yet it's that powerful taskmaster driving them. Their whole life revolves around getting and using these drugs. So I describe that, and I talk about the stages of drug addiction, and then I talk about relapse. And then in chapter 6, it's what to do if your kid is abusing drugs. And I talk about the parents being caught in this rock and a hard place, wanting to address the drug abuse, and setting healthy boundaries for themselves. And just encouraging education. I talk about the stages of grief, because there is a level of grief. There's loss of the connection between the parent and the child. There's loss of their relationship. So those are all part of grieving. The denial stage, then the anger stage, and then bargaining and depression, and finally acceptance. And then I talk about treatment options. Chapter 7 is current drug preferences in the youth and why the heroin is so addictive now. And chapter 8 is the risk of death in young people from drug and opioid addiction. And the blame game and a high-risk time for abuse. And then the risk of contracting other infections, just injecting a foreign substance into your body. There's risk of infectious diseases such as HIV and hepatitis C if you're sharing needles, but also infections of the skin just from using a dirty needle. So and then bacterial endocarditis. This is damage to the heart valves, which is again due to injecting oneself with a dirty needle and getting a bacterial infection. So not just the risk of death from the opiate itself, but also the secondary diseases that can come with that. And then chapter 9 is the forensic medicine, where I discuss some of the cases that I saw that really had an impact on me. And then chapter 10 is getting help for yourself as the parent of someone addicted to drugs. And again, my focus here is to just empower the parents, to help them to take their family back, to take their lives back. And I talk about focusing on themselves. Many times the focus is on the index child, which is the child with the drug addiction that's suffering, but the suffering is affecting the entire family. And I've also seen cases where the one child, the good child, all of a sudden gets neglected because so much energy is focused on the addictive child. And then before you know it, the good child is also abusing drugs. So it's a family issue. It's a family system that's at play here. So I encourage parents to get help for themselves in addition to getting help for their child. I talk about 12-step programs and then just different triggers. We talk about triggers for drug addiction, but I also talk about triggers for the parents that may cause them to fall into negative patterns of relating that may have served a purpose in the past, but are really just dysfunctional in the current situation. And then I discuss importance of having a support network and then creating your own personal manifesto. And I have a program here that I hope to develop around this book that is a specific program that parents can go through to help themselves in terms of relating to their children and strengthening themselves individually. So this is my book. It's called Zombie Effects. It will be available in few weeks on my website. If you would like to obtain a copy, you can go to my website. It's www.zeldaokia.com, and you can sign up to receive a copy when they are available. And again, I just want to showcase my website, which is www.zeldaokia.com. I have some blog posts up there that may be helpful or interesting, particularly to people that are dealing with the issue, particularly parents, and how to communicate better with their children. And also I have some websites that I would also recommend for obtaining more information about drugs in general, and that includes the SAMHSA website, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse